2025 has arrived, so let's look at the state of ADA website compliance. And best practices remain the same, which are one, to publish an accessibility statement, and two, to make your website WCAG 2.1 AA conformant. These have been the best practices, and they remain the best practices for avoiding any lawsuits. Now, let's talk about the changes and really the updates to the legal landscape. One, there will be a disruption in the legal landscape, and I'm actually going to publish a video about this on my channel. You can expect this in Q1 of 2025, but there's going to be a happening that takes place and it will be unexpected. And you're probably going to be able to think after the fact that this was predictable, but this is something that's going to happen. I'm not going to tell you what it is now, but just know that there is a disruption and I will have an announcement here. And this isn't my doing. It's just something else that's happening that I'm aware of because I talk to a lot of people in this space. And then so one prediction on my part is there will be less lawsuits generally, in part possibly because of this announcement, but also because to me, like when I'm looking through the complaints and when I'm looking through the friction that's taking place, I see lawsuits trending downwards. Now, I could be wrong on this because in other years, I've also thought there'd be a decrease in litigation and there hasn't been. But that's just my sense is that it's becoming more difficult for plaintiffs' law firms. And what you're seeing is more website owners actually defending against these claims that are being made. So that's something that I anticipate. There's also an update in October of 2024. The Southern District of New York said that online-only businesses can no longer be sued. And so this is something where we might see significantly less complaints filed in federal court in New York. And you might possibly see like a flattening of cases filed in New York federal court. And so we know New York federal court has been a hotbed for these cases, but what's going to happen is we will see more New York state filings. So it's just going to flow to another court that's more receptive to these complaints. So I have here at the expectation, and this isn't really so much a prediction because it's very obvious, we'll see more New York state court filings and we'll see other states involved. And I think New Jersey would be a logical next step. We already see some activity in New Jersey, but an increase in New Jersey filings as well as other states. So this would be somewhat unrelated, but I think we'll see more activity in Pennsylvania and Illinois and possibly some other states. And on this note, I'm going to tab over to a complaint that was filed in the Supreme Court of the state of New York for the county of Bronx. So here we're already seeing the effects of this October decision, and we've got this complaint filed in New York State Court. And by the way, this complaint was filed by Ms. Rocky Krob, and they are one of the most active plaintiffs' law firms in this space. And just scrolling down here, this is just really like an add-on here. Don't take too much away from this, but Ms. Rocky Krob does cite to reference the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines version 2.1 conformance level AA. And they write, to be accessible, a website should conform to at least level AA. So this doesn't mean that we follow what plaintiffs' lawyers say, but they are practically the ones that are enforcing the Americans with Disabilities Act against website owners. Remember, it's not explicit in the law under Title III. So what's happening is practically plaintiffs' lawyers are cumulatively the ones that are, that website owners have to defend against, and they have to reduce their risk according to what plaintiffs' lawyers are looking for. The reason I bring this up is because it's been best practice. We see one active plaintiffs' law firm stating as much, and so that's what I recommend my clients gravitate towards. And you might think, well, what about WCAG 2.2? WCAG 2.2 is obviously great, right? If we can incorporate those additional success criteria, that would be great. But there's already so much to work on in 2.1 that I recommend starting there and then extending from there. But you can always go directly to 2.2 if you'd like. But 2.1 AA remains best practice. So we're going to tab back over to the graphic. And now we're going to look at taking action. So what do you need to do to reduce the likelihood that you are sued in 2025 over website accessibility? Well, first, here's a simple one. Do not use widgets, apps, plugins, etc., whatever they are being called now. They do not work. There is no automated means of making your website WCAG conformant. And in fact, it can increase the likelihood that you are targeted in litigation. So absolutely do not use widgets, apps, plugins, etc. They don't make your website accessible. They don't make your website WCAG conformant, and they don't make your website ADA compliant. And plaintiffs' lawyers routinely disregard them. All right, so next I have here the ADA compliance course. And this is because you need to prioritize the high-risk accessibility issues. And in my course, what I've done is I've researched these complaints that are filed by the most active plaintiffs' law firms, not just Ms. Rocky Krob. There are literally dozens of plaintiffs' law firms in this space. I've researched their complaints, extracted all the accessibility issues, and then prioritized the issues in order of what are the issues that are most likely to lead to a complaint or a demand letter. So this is where I would focus in on first, because as I talked about, working through WCAG 2.1 AA standard, the standard is going to take you a while. So while you're improving accessibility, you may as well work on the issues that are most likely to lead to litigation. So the highest risk issues, work on those first, work through those strategically, and then continue on with conformance. But unless you're having a contractor take care of remediation, then you're going to be working on this in-house, and you want to do so strategically. So I highly recommend my ADA compliance course, which I will link to in the description. The next bullet point here, and this is for taking action with a lower budget, by the way. The next bullet point here is for scan errors down, to get your scan errors down to zero. So two popular scans are Wave and Google Lighthouse. And obviously best practice is going to be to have your scan errors down to zero. But just keep in mind that plaintiffs' lawyers are looking beyond scans now. Scans are always a best practice, right? Because we want to be WCAG 2.1 AA conformant. And if we are, then there will not be any scan errors, or at least there shouldn't, unless they're false positives. But plaintiffs' lawyers, just like everyone else, they look to scans as a shortcut. And so it's always best practice to have your scan errors down to zero. Just, some people are so focused on scans, and this is to this day, it's just people are like, oh, I just need to get my scan errors down to zero. No, that's a start. And that's best practice, but plaintiffs' lawyers hire accessibility professionals to work for them. So they'll have teams of accessibility professionals that are finding accessibility issues. And they're not hiring these teams because they need someone to scan web pages for them. They can have their secretaries or whoever else, an intern, do that. What they're doing is they're looking for very detailed issues. And this is not to say that plaintiffs' lawyers are all the same, because they all approach this in different ways. But what I am telling you is that there are many active plaintiffs' law firms that are looking well beyond what can be flagged by automation. I myself have been recruited by a plaintiff's law firm. So just keep this in mind, that plaintiffs' law firms are not only using scans. And then, so the next bullet point I have is to work with contractors who show attention to detail with accessibility. So if you have a lower budget, you're probably not going to go to a service provider like myself. You're probably going to work with contractors and do the best you can, which is completely fine. You're aware that there is some inherent risk because you're not taking care of everything, but you are working with, let's say, hopefully a web developer who can take care of some of these issues, or maybe you're working with a contractor who's going to take care of the content side. So your video, your audio, your text, any documents, they're going to look into that. So work with contractors who show that they will pay attention to accessibility. Make sure they're not just talking about it or talking of it, but they're actually immersed in accessibility. And if you do that, then that's going to lead to better results. Another possibility for small businesses on a lower budget is, or even governmental entities, anybody on a lower budget, is to invest in a mini audit. And when I say mini audit, this is going to consist of typically five or fewer pages. And here's where you're going to still get an audit. It's just going to be these very essential core pages for your websites that are going to be a nice representative sample of the rest of your website. Get a mini audit, because then you still have a professional audit. You still know all of the accessibility issues for a given scope. Let's say it's 5 pages. It's going to cost less. You're going to get a lot of value from that mini audit. And by the way, accessible.org, which is my company, offers mini audits. So that's another action for lower budgets. And then one more is to take immediate action. It's so important that you are working on this proactively and not pushing it down later. And the reason I say this is because a lot of website owners, they become aware of website accessibility and the risk of being sued, but then they put it off because they haven't been sued. So it doesn't have that immediate or urgency behind it. And what happens too often, and I talk to the website owners who this happens to, is they're sued and then they're regretful after the fact. So don't wait to get sued. And if you don't think it can happen to you, just read the horror stories on Reddit. This can absolutely happen to any website owner, and especially e-commerce website owners. So take immediate action. Just know that accessibility isn't something that you're going to be able to take care in a weekend. In most cases, that's going to be unrealistic. So you need to take immediate action, whatever that action is. And just because, let's just say that you're thinking, well, I don't have the budget to do anything right now. Well, you can still invest your time into accessibility and go ahead and take care of some of the important and or preliminary accessibility issues that need your attention and can lead to lawsuits. And I can tell you right now, if you take care of alternative text and alternative text related issues, which are not technically complex, you will take off the accessibility issue that has the highest associated risk with it. All right, so continuing on to the third and last column on my 2025 ADA website compliance graphic, we have action for higher budgets. Here, I'm going to recommend an audit, and I have in parentheses that not an audit is not a scan. And that's something I always like to emphasize because so many people still think that scans are audits. Scans are not audits, they are scans. They are something that you can use right now for free. You don't get really the value for paying for a scan is nominal. So you don't need to pay for a scan. You can use WaveScan, you can use Google Lighthouse, you can use ActScan. You don't need to pay for a scan, but a scan is not an audit. It's not going to be comprehensive. If you really want to make sure that you are on top of everything, you're going to need an audit. And then there is remediation. Most of my clients take on remediation in-house. So it's not something they even want to source out. They want to take this in-house. You just have to make sure that remediation is done correctly, because if it's not, you are still going to have accessibility issues, and there's going to be outstanding risk that you may be completely unaware of, even though you've addressed accessibility. So this really is an area where attention to detail it's so important. So make sure that remediation is done correctly. And that's where we usually have my clients have a re-audit, or it's sometimes called other things. But the point is, we're still looking at those issues that were resolved and making sure that they were resolved correctly. You may want to create an accessibility policy for your organization. So whether you're a state and local government, especially if you're a state and local government, actually, but even if you're a small business or a solo entrepreneur, I recommend having an accessibility policy in place. Now, you can download an accessibility policy, my template, from accessible.org for free. It's behind an email subscription, but that will be there for you. The reason for the accessibility policy is it shows that you are already considering accessibility, you are taking steps for accessibility, and so it's a part of your processes. And this can help you later, potentially, if you're trying to get a case dismissed. So it's something that won't take you that much additional time, but there is some potential for an ROI down the line. And it's free to create an accessibility policy. And I've done all of the hard work for you. It's in my accessibility policy template. I will include a link to accessible.org for the template. As long as you subscribe to the email, you can get it. And it's different from a statement. So an accessibility policy is not an accessibility statement. That's very important to keep in mind. An accessibility policy is for internal use. An accessibility statement is going to contain details that are relevant for public consumption. And by the way, this can also apply to the lower budget. But the next bullet point I have is training. Again, this applies to a lower budget, but training is going to help so that you maintain accessibility. So that it's not just something where we have this audit and remediation, and then you go back to status quo. And let's say your designer recommends a new template, and then you're using this new template and you introduce new accessibility issues. That's going to work against you and unravel all of the investment that you've made. So you definitely don't want to do that. So here I have training. Of course, I have the ADA compliance course. There's also the WCAG course. I recommend both. But this way you will understand more what are the considerations that are going into accessibility. Because if you just get an audit and you just have contractors remediate, you really won't understand all of the considerations that need to go into your website. And then that's what the last bullet point I have here is: don't introduce new accessibility issues, because first of all, you don't want to get sued whatsoever. But then if you are, let's make it a one and done. Like if you do experience that negative outcome, make sure that you limit it, flatten it, and that it doesn't happen again. So this is 2025 ADA website compliance. As I've said, the best practices remain the same. There are going to be a few changes in the landscape, and then hopefully we see the serial litigation trending down. That's to be determined, but either way, here are the recommendations for making your website more accessible and hopefully following best practices for ADA compliance. So I will include links to my courses that I have mentioned, and then also accessible.org services. I will include those links in the description.